This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a highly popular, multi-award-winning actor, director, and musician who's been immortalized for his portrayal of the Vulcan security chief, Lieutenant Tuvok, in the blockbuster TV series Star Trek Voyager. In fact, he has the distinction of appearing in 4 Star Trek TV series, as well as in the feature film Star Trek Generations. Besides playing Lieutenant Tuvok in Star Trek Voyager, he played Devor in Star Trek The Next Generation. He played Picard in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. He played a changeling impersonating Lieutenant Tuvok in an episode of Star Trek Picard. And in the movie Star Trek Generations, he played a lieutenant on USS Enterprise B. But far beyond his work on that iconic franchise, our guest has many talents that encompass a wide spectrum of the performing arts, including writing, producing, directing, songwriting, recording albums like Only a Dream in Rio, Tim Russ, Kushangaza, and Brave New World, and performing with his band, Tim Russ Crew. On the big screen, you've seen him in many movies, including Live Free or Die Hard, Rampart, Grayscale, The Midnight Sky, Nightshade, The Star City Murders, Fifth Passenger, and many more. And on TV, besides the Star Trek shows I mentioned, he's appeared in dozens of classic series, including Hill Street Blues, 30-something, The Highwaymen, Murphy Brown, ER, CSI Miami, iCarly, Criminal Minds, American Horror Story, NCIS, and yes, he played the sarcastic doorman Frank in Samantha Who. He's also appeared in many great TV movies and miniseries, including Roots, The Gift, Alien Nation, The Heroes of Desert Storm, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Asteroid versus Earth, Karma, and many more. And as a director, he brought us feature films like Star Trek of Gods and Men, Junkie, and A Night at the Silent Movie Theater. And he's directed episodes of TV shows including The FBI Files, 12-Sided Die, and the award-winning web series Bloomers. Our guest has won an Indie Series Award, a Telly Award, an Indie Short Fest Award, an Indie X Film Festival Award, 2 Vegas Movie Awards, and an Emmy Award for directing several public service ads. I'm delighted and honored to welcome Tim Russ to our show. Tim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You had a fascinating childhood as the son of an Air Force officer. You lived in many places like Alaska, Taiwan, the Philippines, even Turkey. When did you get the acting bug?
The acting bug I would have acquired when I was in my final year of high school, senior year of high school, and I was upstate New York. And I took an acting class, and I was absolutely enamored with it. It was an elective class, and I took it, and I was hooked at that point. Shortly thereafter, I worked in a couple of musicals, Charlie Brown and West Side Story, and I was just even more taken by that whole scene of theater and working on stage. So I pursued college degrees in the theater arts as a result of that, and studied for another 5 years before moving out to the West Coast. So it started when my last year in high school is when I got hooked into it.
Well, after you got your theater arts degree from St. Edward's University, you attended graduate school at Illinois State University, and in 2008, they inducted you into their Hall of Fame. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was great.
In 1987, you appeared in Spaceballs, directed by Mel Brooks, and even though it was only 2 days of work and you said only 4 words, everybody remembers you from that movie. Does that surprise you?
Yes, it never ceases to amaze me how many people can remember me from those 4 words as opposed to 7 years working on Star Trek Voyager. Everyone knows that scene and that movie.
You were the trooper who combed the desert with a giant comb. You will always be immortalized for that. And besides Mel Brooks, you've worked with a number of really great directors like Clint Eastwood in a wonderful movie called Bird, starring Forrest Whitaker, about the life of the legendary jazz musician Charlie Parker. What was Clint Eastwood like as a director?
He did not take that many takes. We only did a few takes to get the scene the shots and stuff that he wanted. So he was very kind. He was very soft-spoken. very easygoing. And the work day that day was as smooth as it could possibly be. A very similar way of doing work was George Clooney. I worked on Midnight Sky with him. Same thing, almost exactly the same thing, same style, the same way of working on set. And I really enjoyed both of those projects.
Another performer that you worked with as a director was Billy Crystal in Mr. Saturday Night. What was
Yes.
he like as a director?
Billy Crystal was wonderful. I worked with John Lovitz as well, also sort of from that same background in comedy, and wonderful to work with. Exciting. On the Lovitz project, I think I was doing a part in this live sort of show. It was like a variety show, and they asked me at the very last minute to do the announcements of all of the actors at the very beginning of the show, which is unusual because they said they didn't have anybody else to do it, or they weren't planning on it or whatever, and they decided at the last minute to have me do. They said, "Why could you do the announcements for the show?" And this is a live broadcast. It was not, I had one shot at that to get it right. So it was a little stressful, but yes, I did it. Yeah.
Well, you've got a very resonant voice. I can totally get why they'd ask you to do that. Is there one specific director, Tim, who has influenced you the most in creating your own directing style?
I grew up watching Paddy Chayefsky's work. Yeah, him, and there's a couple others that I do, but I sort of enjoyed watching their work as I was growing up. And more recently, like I said, I liked Paddy Chayefsky's writing. I liked the director for a couple of his films has been out, and his name escapes me right now. Live and Die in L.A., I think, was one of the movies that I really liked a lot. Network, of course, I liked a lot. I liked the style of directing in those films. And there have been others that I've really enjoyed. Guy Ritchie, I like his style also. So at those three or four, and what it comes down to, depending upon what project you're shooting, the style of the story, the script and the story, you have to tailor your directing style to what the essence of that story is. So, depending upon whether it's a horror or whether it's an action thriller or whether it's a really intimate drama, you're going to have to adjust your style of directing to that way of shooting. And I think that's really going to make a difference. I can't come in there and do, a Guy Ritchie style of shooting in a story that just is not suited for it. It's got to be something based on what that script is in terms of style, in terms of which way I want to do it. Is it a lot of fast cuts, or is it really long, slow shots, or is it wide shots with no coverage at all? Because there's a couple of films I've seen there where that style really, really works well. That you just hold back and you don't do a lot of coverage and you shoot the scene from a wide and just hold on it. And that's rare. You usually don't see too much of that, but it's an interesting style, and it does work for certain types of films.
Yes, that's a very common style for someone like Elia Kazan, Otto
Right.
Preminger.
Right.
So are you the kind of director that you would want to have as an actor?
Yeah, I think because I've worked as an actor in front of camera for so many years that, it makes it easier for me to communicate with the actors. I can speak their language. I understand every single nuance and issue that they're going through in presenting this piece. So my notes to them are going to be something that I'm as an acting director, they can digest, they can understand. I don't have to. It's not going to be something that's going over their head. I can speak to them on their own language, their own level, to make sure that we can dial in whatever it is that they're bringing. If I've done my homework right, I've cast the right actor for that role in the first place, which saves 75-80% of the work for you. And it's happened in the projects that I've worked on that has been the case almost always. I've very rarely had to have to knuckle down or have to really worry or work a scene to get it up to the speed that I want. It very rarely has happened. There might have been a couple of small roles, some bit roles or something where the actors were just starting out. They didn't have as much experience. And in those cases, yeah, I'd give them a couple of prompts and things to help them out. But most of the actors for the roles that are decent size within the piece, I usually try to cast people either that I've worked with before and I know them, or they're exactly like the role. And that's really half the key right there. They're very much like the character themselves.
Yeah, that's such an important aspect of directing is the casting. Now,
Yes.
of course, I have to ask you a few questions about Star Trek. It's well known, Tim, that you were a serious Trekkie before landing the role of Tuvok. So I would imagine you knew exactly what a Vulcan was supposed to look like and act like. But how much pressure did you feel knowing that because of Leonard Nimoy, the audience had huge expectations of you?
To begin with, it's a misnomer that I was necessarily specifically a Trek fan. What I was knowledgeable about the series because when I was growing up and there were only three channels, they showed a number of shows in syndication over and over and over. So I know as much about Trek as I know about Gilligan's Island. I can relate to both in terms of how many times I've seen the episodes. So I was lucky enough to come in to playing this character with knowledge of what Spock's character had established. And the most important thing to me was number one, to make the producers happy so I could keep my job. And number two, to make sure that the fans would believe my character as a Vulcan because my character is the first African American Vulcan, number one. We haven't seen before, so we got to get just past that hurdle. And then the second hurdle of filling his shoes. So it was very important to me to make sure that that character was believable as a Vulcan character.
Was there a lot of pressure because of trying to fill Leonard Nimoy's shoes?
No, not any more than, what I will put on myself. I mean, like I said, the preliminary pressure was that the producers would be happy with my performance and be satisfied with what I was doing. And then secondarily for myself, I just wanted my portrayal had to be, as far as I was concerned, had to be believable as a Vulcan character. And so the template that I came in with at the very beginning was based on Spock's character, but the added layer of the fact that I was not half Vulcan, I was full Vulcan. So that made a difference in how I portrayed this character.
Now, you've said publicly that Gene Roddenberry was not one of your champions. It was Rick Berman who really pushed for you. Why do you think Roddenberry wasn't a fan when we all fell in love with you immediately?
Well, it's a matter of the roles that I was reading for. See, because by the time Voyager came around, Gene Roddenberry had already passed. Rick Berman was in charge. So the roles that I was reading for before that were Geordi LaForge's role. I was reading for the Doctor in DS9. I was reading for a number of guest star roles here and there on the episodes, and I just didn't book them. And I can only assume that Gene just did not see me, in those roles and wasn't necessarily my champion, which is fine. That's show business, as they say. Almost always you have to have champions. You and I both know, and everybody that's watching and listening has seen directors and producers use the same actors over and over in their projects because they like those actors and they want to work with them again and again and again. And that's what happened when Berman took over. He was my champion. He booked me on a role. He liked me. He brought me back, brought me back, brought me back again. And that's how it happens. That's how it works.
It must be so frustrating for somebody who knows they're really good, but they're not part of that inner circle. They never got a job with one of those directors before, so they can't break in. I can't even imagine how you had the resilience to just keep pushing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I pushed really hard from the very beginning. 1981 is when I arrived here. About 1985 or 86 is when I got a break, as it were, that was big enough to get me rolling on my career. And most of my career was television. So luckily for me, I actually prefer that. I know in the unspoken hierarchy of entertainment tiers that television was like number two or three, but at the end of the day, those were the best paying gigs because of the back end residuals and syndication, more so than feature films would have been. So at the end of the day, I have to consider myself lucky. There is serendipity in this. And I sometimes have survivor's guilt with friends of mine who have not hit as hard or as well as I was able to do it. And partly of it is just a matter of serendipity. I could have made any one of a couple of decisions along that way that this outcome could have been entirely different. I don't know where it could have ended up if I had made just one or two decisions earlier on. I still remember those moments fondly. And so there is an element of chance. There is an element of being in the right place at the right time. There is an element of having a door open and you walk in and you're able to convince that producer or director that you're right for that role and they book you. And then they might come back and book you again. And as a result of that role, everything else comes following down. And that is literally how it worked.
So when
Started
you
off,
mention survivor's guilt, I hope you don't ever feel imposter syndrome like so many actors tell me they feel, because let me tell you, your portrayal of Tuvok, I don't know if this is going to make sense to you, but I feel like you're channeling a little bit of James Earl Jones and Charlton Heston in there. Does that make any sense?
well, you know, the character he had a stoic edge to him. And James Earl Jones is one of my, mentors. He was one of my idols, one of my, somebody that I idolized and loved to see his work. William Marshall also, who appeared on the original series, also a big fan of his, very similar, theatrically, classically trained on stage, etc. Both of those actors. And I could appreciate their portrayal of their characters and the way that they worked. And I'm sure that there might have been some of that in the back of my head in terms of the way that I would be able to portray, Tuvok's character. And Tuvok, because of his walk and talk, it's not too far off from adopting those nuances of the two actors. Absolutely very similar.
Well, you mentioned stoic. I would say that the emotional range of Tuvok as a character was actually pretty narrow. And I'm wondering if that was a bit of a challenge for you.
Not at all, because, people ask you, well, was it difficult to play that role and not showing emotion? I said, well, not showing emotion is easy, man. What's hard is showing emotion. What you go to school for, what you take workshops for, what you study for, showing emotions. It's much harder to convince a human being of how you genuinely feel on screen. It's much more difficult to show that and to convince somebody who's watching you to believe in what you feel by showing the nuances of emotion and the dynamics of emotion in a scene than it is to not show any at all. It's not showing any at all is a cakewalk. That's easy, to be very subtle. As my partner and castmate Bob Picard always say, I've got to play King Lear with an eyebrow. That's all I'm doing. So at the end of the day, for me, I could fall out of bed and play that character. It was very, very easy.
Well, I got to tell you, when you would do that mind meld, you made everybody wish we could be you.
Yes, the mind meld. Yeah, yeah, that's an element of that character that made it very, very interesting. In a couple of episodes in particular, it was very interesting.
Did you have any input into the storylines for your character?
Yeah, generally I had sort of a suggestion to the writers near the very first season. I just wanted to put a bug in their ear and say, look, I think it would be interesting if we can have stories that focus on my character for that episode that would put that character in a situation where his logic and his reason, and a stoic sort of behavior and his demeanor would not serve him in order to extricate him from the situation he was in. So he's got to be in a situation where he has to compromise. He has to defer to another method to get out of the situation that he's in, to solve the problem that he has to solve. We have to see him in a situation he's not necessarily accustomed to. And that is what makes it interesting, because then we can get a little deeper into that character. We can peel back a layer or two on that character, because otherwise you don't want him to be too one or two dimensional.
No, no, I think you actually encapsulated exactly why the character was so mesmerizing. And now, according to my research, I hope I've got this right, Tim. I believe you're the only Star Trek actor who has appeared in scenes with 8 actors who've been captains: William Shatner, Alan Ruck, Patrick Stewart, Avery Brooks, Kate Mulgrew, George Takei, Todd Stashwick, and Jerry Ryan, who was a future captain. Do you have a favorite captain?
Well, I'd have to go along with Kate Mulgrew, because, I was there. I was doing the screen tests when she was coming in to audition for that role. And I fondly remember, after doing screen tests with the other actresses that they had brought in, I just fondly remember the first time that she walks onto the bridge and does the dialogue and sits in her captain's chair. And I was like, okay, there's the captain right there. They don't have to look any farther. She's the one. And
you were right.
Yes, absolutely right. There was nobody else. I mean, I was there for the screen tests. I witnessed them. and a couple of them were very good. Yeah, they were fine, but they just didn't have that thing. And Katie is already there. And of course, I know her, and her personality is very similar to the captain's. And again, that's part of the thing. When you're casting someone, they've got to have that personality. I can tell you that she is as tough as nails, and she doesn't take any BS, and she's also a hopeless romantic. She has two elements, and they played those elements in the series as well in the episode. So she is something else. She's a firebrand, that one, and so I've got to say that working with her as the captain, I really enjoyed not only just the working with her on the set and such, but also her portrayal of the captain in the situation that she was in, having to hold that ship together in uncharted space was just amazing. So very cool.
Yeah, she was terrific. She really conveyed leadership, the
Yes.
very essence of leadership. Now, you directed at least one episode of Star Trek Voyager, if not more. What was it like directing your own castmates?
Well, I worked on Living Witness, which was an absolutely wonderful episode, and I was so glad to be able to have pulled that one because it's a totally random choice, and you get what they give you. And very fortunate to have gotten that episode to direct. And what was also very cool is because in that episode, all of the cast members, the characters, have to play the dark side of themselves. So I didn't have any conversation with any of them prior to shooting that episode. I showed up on set in each scene that they appeared in, and they brought the most amazing portrayal of the dark side of themselves that I could not have, tried to develop it, imagine it, or make it. They just came on, and from the first word of dialogue, they were believable. They played the hell out of those roles. Not one single word beforehand, not one note, not one anything. That was just remarkable. I was absolutely blown away because they all had to do that. And each one had their own version of the dark side of themselves. And that it just, speaks to the talent of the actors. That's what the actors are supposed to do. They're supposed to come in prepared. They're supposed to have their character down. So you don't have to do that much work. And they certainly delivered on that episode.
Well, I like the fact that it appeared that they wanted to do good for you. They like
Oh,
you.
yeah. They not only that, but they're pros. So even if it wasn't me directing, they're still going to come in and they're going to deliver those characters, and they're going to deliver those types, that play those characters and play themselves in that sort of mode, regardless of who's shooting it, because that's what they do. Again, they're professionals, and most of the cast on my show were older. They were not young. Garrett Wong was the youngest cast member we had. Everybody else was older. Everybody else had kids and families and all that good stuff. So, they're experienced, they're seasoned, they're talented, and they're disciplined, and that is what you want, on anybody's show, not just Trek.
Yeah, and team players.
Yeah,
So, Tim, how does it feel when fans come up to you and tell you how much your work on Star Trek means to them?
I can't tell you how many times that has happened, and it will continue to happen. And I am very much taken aback every time it does happen. I simply have to, rationalize in my brain, the difference between me going to a set, saying some dialogue, hitting some marks, and then going home. And that's essentially what Trek was. As a matter of fact, any single camera show, that's what the routine is. And it's just a routine. And it can be long and tedious and monotonous. It can definitely be all of that and tiring. But to go and just do the work that you do, it's just work. It's a gig. It's, doing what you do. And then someone tells you that their life, literally their lives, were saved because of my character. And I'm blown away and flabbergasted every single time someone tells me that. Because it's like, it's two different worlds, man. It's two different perspectives that are on opposite sides of the galaxy, if you will. That my work, which I don't think of anything other than just work, the aftermath of that, the interpretation of that on the screen, reaches out and grabs these people's, lives, their emotions, their mindsets and their moods, and changes their decisions about life, about their life. It's not just they're choosing a specific career based on what I did on the show or what the show was about, but their lives might have been in jeopardy, in terms of their emotional downfall. And all of a sudden, it's reversed. They are pulled out of the fire because of my walking onto the set, saying some dialogue, and hitting my marks. I cannot rationalize that. It's just really hard to put that together. I'm speechless every time people come up to me and tell me that. And it happens often.
Well, I'm going to tell you that I think that the reason that you have remained so humble and so grounded and so centered is because you don't let that go to your head, because you do see it as a job. You don't tell yourself, I'm changing people's lives here. This is monumental. You just do a really good job. And I'm so glad you get that feedback, because people see you as their friend and as a role model, even though you're being someone else, saying words that somebody else wrote.
Right.
But I love the fact that you don't let yourself absorb, when you're doing a job, how important it is. You're just being a professional.
No. Yeah. There's no way. There's no way that I'm going to think of what I do as far as the aftermath. When I'm working, I'm only thinking about what I'm doing in the present. So what really is important to me is that I make the moment believable to whatever potential audience there may be for that role. I've got to be happy with it. Director's got to be happy with it. And I want to be believable in what I'm doing, not conscious of whatever the impact might be on somebody who's watching it in terms of their own lives. I just want to make sure that within the context of the story, that moment, that beat is believable. That's important. And the most important thing is just making sure that that's believable. The aftermath, that's only a matter of finding out later with the feedback. And, again, it's remarkable that people have been impacted by it so much as they have been.
Well, you talk about believability. I think one of the most impressive things about your body of work, even though you're very strongly identified with Star Trek, Tim, you've managed to avoid being typecast as an actor. You've played every kind of role in every genre. How did you escape getting pigeonholed?
Well, in a sense, like many actors in many situations, I sort of have been pigeonholed into a lane. I have a lane that I'm usually in, and I have been for a long time. That lane is, very similar type of roles. Doctors, lawyers, judges, detectives, that kind of thing. I've played, I don't know how many of those roles, and I still do today. Some dad roles more recently, which has broken out of that. I don't play silly visual comedies, wonky, eccentric, crazy types of characters. I've never ever booked anything like that, almost in my entire career. Most of the roles have been within military, detectives, cops, lawyers, doctors. That's what I play. That's my lane. And look how far that is from Tuvok's character. Not that far. It's pretty darn close. So they're still in that lane. And as I tell young actors who are starting out, you better find your lane. You got to find out what it is you do. It's going to be the way you look. It's going to be the way you speak, the way your voice is, the way you carry yourself, the shape of your body. All those other things are going to come into play because this is a picture business. So when you walk through the door, the first thing people see is you haven't opened your mouth yet. They've already judged you. They've already got an idea of who you are just when you come through the door. And that character has to be believable. Again, you have to convince people that you are who you are. And part of that has to be what your walk and talk is. If your walk and talk is this lane here, you better get really good at that walk and talk because that's what they're going to book you for.
Well, when you look at your lane, you've been involved in a number of projects with important social justice themes, like Samaritan, the Mitch Snyder story, which was about homelessness. Right. Roots, the Gift was about slavery. Right. The Heroes of Desert Storm was about the tragedies of war. Social Nightmare was about cyberbullying. You co wrote, produced, and starred in East of Hope Street, which dealt with the struggles of refugees in America.
Right.
Is it important to you to participate in movies and TV shows that convey strong social justice messages?
If I have an opportunity to do so, yes. And it all depends on whether I have an opportunity to do so. So if somebody comes to me with a role that happens to have a project that has a very strong social theme, social messaging theme, more than happy to participate in that. Some of the projects that I have of my own, one of them is an historical biopic, which is very important to me because the lead character is African American. And hardly anybody knows anything about this character, but he was a hero in World War I. So I'm working on trying to get that project off the ground. To me, that would be a very strong social statement in that this character is being exposed to the public for what he accomplished as a minority at the turn of the last century. You know, as far as people bringing projects to me, I get a myriad of them, and it just depends on, you know, what those themes are. They're not always that way, and I will take them on whether they are or whether they are not. It's not a crusade that I'm leading at this point in time. It's just happenstance if the project happens to have that kind of theme.
Well, you have an amazing track record. First of all, I hope that when that movie comes out, you will honor me by coming back to promote it.
Oh, let me absolutely let me get the bloody thing financed and off the ground first. And that is a very long slog, let me tell you. It's a heavy lift and it's going to take some time, but absolutely, sure,
Well, we
absolutely.
have to manifest that. Now,
Yes,
while we're talking about your involvement in important projects, I should mention that you won an Emmy Award for directing a number of public service ads for the
yes,
FBI on
right.
intellectual property theft and cyberbullying. Again, I say to you, sir, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank
I
you.
want to ask you about Tim Russ, the storyteller. You've written screenplays about a wide variety of topics. The Junkie was about a drug addict taking on the cartel. You wrote a children's book and CD called Bugsters. You've written or co written dozens of songs for your albums. What drives your creativity as a writer and composer?
Well, the majority of music that I've written for myself, my own stuff, has not been that much in terms of numbers. I'm not as prolific a songwriter as many of my contemporaries are. As a musician, I prefer performing live. That's my main thing, is live performance. So the music that I put together a lot of times are rearrangements of obscure cover songs that nobody's ever heard of. And that's where I like to live, in that sort of genre. As far as the film and television stuff, I tend to work with writers who have written a lot of material full time and have that experience and that DNA. I don't have the DNA to sit down at a blank page on a computer screen and start writing from scratch on a feature project. It's not going to be me. I have co-written, I have rewritten, and I have worked with writers on a number of projects. And that's primarily what I do. I don't have the DNA, to sit down and just start writing a project from scratch. Not going to happen. I would prefer to work with a writer. A writer who has not only the experience, but again, the DNA. There's something about a really good writer that is intuitive. And if they have a few years on them, they've got some experience as well to pack in. And there's just something about them where they can turn a scene, they can create a twist, they can come up with planting seeds in the story and then paying them off later on and get it just right. And that is magic, man. That's like alchemy. And so I prefer to work with people who are that skilled and that talented with the concept, which I would work with them on the concept and work with them on the story and putting everything together, rather than me sitting down and banging out, something from scratch. No, that's just not me. I enjoy the hands-on, the performance, the directing, the acting, music playing and performing. That's where I live, more so than any other.
Well, when you sing, I can hear Cat Stevens, Bruce Hornsby, Bill Withers, even a bit of Elton John when you sing. Who were your musical influences?
Well, growing up, I grew up with classic rock. So a lot of, at the time, it was hard rock. At the time, it was, or pop rock. Santana, Chicago were a couple of my early influences, a guitarist. I liked supergroups at the time. I liked Zeppelin at the time. I liked R&B. I liked Earth, Wind and Fire, like Sly and the Family Stone, one of my all-time favorites of R&B. the big, huge bands with the seven-piece, six, seven-piece bands, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, all these guys, and then moving into the folk rock artists, which would be similar, Cat Stevens, James Taylor, that type of music. And consequently, I started playing at 16. So I've been doing this for almost 50 years. And I played all of those styles of music on that journey. I started off in rock. Then I started playing R&B with a big seven-piece band. Then I went from that to playing acoustic, singer-songwriter stuff in coffee houses for my college years and post-college years. So I got to work that way. Then I went into top 40, made a living at that for a while, 4 or 5 nights a week, playing in a club, 3 hours a night. And I was, paying the rent doing that. And so I'm singing all kinds of stuff during those gigs. And then from there, eventually recording my own material and other covers, and now putting together the band that I have and performing the band that I have, more into the blues rock, classic rock, roots music, that kind of thing. So now I am where I am, and the only reason I'm able to sing the variety of styles that I sing is because I played all those varieties and styles during those years. So for me, that journey, and I'm glad that I had a chance to partake in that journey, because that's really the biggest influence for me, is working within each one of those genres of music. Those are big, huge windows of music and styles at the time. So, and I sing, some songs that are just recently released that are out there. So depending upon, whether my voice is right for them and the range is right for them and my band can play them with the parts we have, I'll play them. And I pick and choose very carefully which ones I do.
So, Tim, given that you're so well known as a successful actor, is it difficult to be taken seriously as a musician within the music industry?
Yes, absolutely is. I don't know what it is. As a casting director once said a long time ago, there are no rules and they are strictly adhered to. And that applies to the music business, because a rap artist can walk right out of the rap world, okay? And even if it's R&B or singing, whatever, usually it's rap, but it could be any other genre. Walk right out of that and into the lead role of a feature film, no problem whatsoever. Not a problem. Come on down, everybody can jump in the pool. You try to reverse that, and it never happens. It will not happen. And you can look at the Billboard charts for the last 30, 40 years, and how many actors have had, top 40 Billboard hits, charted. Maybe one or two here and there. Every time somebody came out with, I don't care how big they were, a lot bigger than I am. I mean, worldwide known actors. And they're just kind of never taken seriously, almost laughed at in terms of trying to cross over. It is not acceptable for the actors to play and perform music. It simply isn't acceptable. I don't know why. It just does not cross over. In the other direction, all day long. Rappers lead roles on series have never acted before, and they're in a feature film or the lead role in a series.
No, you're 100% right. The first person I remember saying that was Cher in the 80s, when she decided to start acting, and then nobody took her seriously as a musician anymore. But you will see, and then there's some actors like John Travolta, Patrick Swayze, they may have had, if they were in a musical and they have one song from the musical, then that song becomes a hit. Bobby Sherman had a hit in the 70s, but you're absolutely right. It's as though the public can't see you as a rock star. And yet, Kevin Bacon has a band. Like many of them try.
Yo, absolutely. Bill Mumy from Lost in Space. There's a whole bunch of name actors that have bands. We all have bands, but that's it. We're not, first of all, it would have to be somebody who's probably 16, 17, 18, 20, 22, somewhere in that range. If you're going to hit in terms of pop music, it's going to be between, 17, 18, and 22, 20, because those are the people who are listening to all those songs and making them popular. As we get older, we don't really, do all that. It's young people. So you've got to be young, got to be a young actor. But you've got to come on the scene as a singer-songwriter musician. You cannot come on as an actor and then think you're going to make some songs. Miley Cyrus, for example, she was doing music the whole time, when she was doing her show. She was doing music before she even got into all that stuff. And she was able to bridge that gap into pop music because it was going along side by side with what she was doing. And her father was already very popular, so she had an in. But there are very few serious actors who can make that crossover to pop music and actually break through and be taken seriously. I remember the story, David Cassidy, serious musician, serious songwriter, serious singer. He could not for the life of him break out into doing his own style of music, which is not what they promoted. They wanted bubblegum pop, and that's all he was allowed to do. He could not do the serious stuff. And when Rolling Stone magazine interviewed him, the interview itself was more of a, slight on him. They were making fun of him, in an underhanded sort of very subtle way. They didn't take him seriously. He thought that would be something that would be an honor to be able to be interviewed by Rolling Stone because it's all about the music. Nope. And I remember him talking about it on his documentary, his life story. It just doesn't translate. It goes the other way, but does not go actor to musician. And
But please don't give up, Tim, because your albums are great.
thank you. I don't, it's not even a question. Look, at this point in time, I am also a realist. I understand the music business. I know how it works. If I come up with a song that I record and gets out there and it somehow catches on and becomes really big, I would be very lucky. That would be great, and I would roll with it and do with it. It's not right now my absolute goal to do so. For me, I simply enjoy playing live. I love playing live, and that's what I like to do. So if I get an opportunity to write something, I have written for a couple of films that have been done, independent films, have written some songs for them, or they've used a couple of my songs on their tracks. That's great. That's fabulous. That's fine. Happy with that. I'm okay to go. Not right now looking for a big hit, and it's damn near too late for me at this point anyway. So I'd have to come up with something that's really, really current, really, really now, or really, really eccentric or unusual in order for it to hook and to get out there. So I'd rather just have the stuff I have get licensed by other people and use and go that way than trying to come up with that. Otherwise, it's just playing live. I want to get on the stage with the band, my band or anybody else's band, quite frankly, and perform live. That's what I enjoy doing, playing guitar and singing.
I would love to have the chance one day to see you live. I love your albums. I mentioned the ones that I really love the most in my introduction.
Thank you.
I only have one more question for you, and it's related to your knowledge and expertise in astronomy. Would it be okay to ask you about that?
100%. 100%.
Okay, here's my question. Given what you know about the solar system and beyond, and what you're seeing in terms of the deterioration of our own planet and the commercialization of space travel, do you have faith in the future of the human race?
I have faith in the future of the human race if we reach the point where all of the world's leaders decide uniformly to dismantle all nuclear weapons that on the planet, all of them gone. When we reach that point, there will be a future for the human race. Until that point, our future is sketchy. It is potentially in doubt because those weapons can completely wipe us off this planet and destroy the world for I don't know how long. So we have to reach that point where we evolve as leaders of the countries, to put aside their ego and their paranoia and their whatever, for 10 minutes just to make a decision to get rid of all of the destructive weapons. Now, we've seen leaders come into power that have changed the entire, the entire governmental system of their country and the social system of their country. Gorbachev in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell under our lifetimes, which is really remarkable after it had been in place for such a long time. And that ideology crumbled because of one person who took command and said, we're going to do things differently. That's what we need. People who take command of these countries, leadership of the countries, who want to do something different. They might be younger. Their eyes might have opened. They might have been enlightened, whatever the reason is. They have to come in and decide, we're not going to go down this path anymore. We're going to do this instead. We're going to join the rest of the countries of the world. We're going to try to build this planet and make the planet safer. We're going to have to do all these things, environmentally and otherwise. That is going to be the way in which we ensure, as a species, our future. Beyond that, the priority has to be of the human race, and that's including all of the cultures, all the countries, all the religions and languages, whatever. We have to start figuring out what the priorities are. What are the priorities? I mentioned getting rid of the nuclear weapons. Next thing is the health of the planet. The next thing are the resources. We all need the resources, food and water, for God's sakes. We have to ensure that we have this for the future, because the population at this point is still growing. And we're going to be taxing this planet, in many different ways. So we have to figure out, with our decisions and with our technology, how we're going to sustain ourselves on this world. Because I will tell you, dealing with astronomy, this is a very rare place. And we are very rare as a species. This life form of intelligence is very rare. That has been pointed out by many astrophysicists and astrobiologists. The odds and the number of zeros to get to us is 1.5 miles long. There's a lot of zeros. All of those variables and zeros have to line up for us to be here. And that is not common. Even though the universe can sustain life, there are elements out there. The number of chances it takes for evolution to get to where we are more dice rolls than you can count. So we are a very rare opportunity and existence in this universe. I cannot tell you how rare it is. It's unbelievable.
It's very awe-inspiring. You're giving me goosebumps. Amen to your prayer that the world understands that we have to get rid of nuclear weapons. I have to tell you, Tim, it's been such a pleasure meeting you and having this opportunity to interview you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure as well.
Thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Our guest has been the mega talented Tim Russ. For more information about Mr. Russ, please visit his official website at timrusswebpage.com. You can also follow him on every social media platform, including the Tim Russ Crew Facebook page that you see now on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe to Tim Russ's YouTube channel, now showing on your screen. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sharalampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.